Thank you for joining for this episode of the TechSpective podcast. My guest is Ajit Sancheti from CrowdStrike. Ajit, if you want to introduce yourself, give a little bit of background.
Absolutely. Tony, thanks for having me on the show. I run the next-gen SIEM business for CrowdStrike. I've been doing security for 20 years. I worked in the early days of the intrusion prevention systems, if you remember what they were. Did some work around security testing with fuzzing and the technologies which were in the mid-2000s. And then I was the founder of the company Preempt Security, which worked on identity security, which became part of CrowdStrike, which is how I got here. And now working on rethinking how security operations should work in the new era of all the challenges that we face as security practitioners.
Okay. All right. So you mentioned Preempt. You were co-founder, CEO. How does the experience with Preempt Security and kind of what you guys built there? How has that and kind of merging that in with CrowdStrike shaped your understanding of the SOC challenges and just kind of cybersecurity as a whole?
So if you think about it, when we started with the platforms for security operations, initially you took logging platforms, you built in security capabilities on top of them, and then you got the category of the security, the SIEM, right? And mostly it was driven by endpoint data, and you brought in other data sources like emails and things like that. But as you know, in 2014, 2015, we started to talk more and more about identity-based threats. And identity-based threats became a big part of how attackers were trying to get in. They were not looking to use malware or APTs to get into enterprises. Now they were using compromised credentials. And so compromised credentials became a big part of what a security practitioner needed to use to identify what was going on and figure out how to respond to a threat. And that when we became part of CrowdStrike, it became another dimension of threats that we could help identify and allow companies and businesses to respond to. So you take endpoint, now you combine that with identity, you start to get a much better sense of what threats you're facing. As many of the listeners know, 4 out of 5 breaches in enterprises have some form of credential compromise. It's legitimate credentials or misuse of credentials. So if that is true, combining identity with endpoint, you're bringing 2 of the most important vectors into one platform.
Okay. I would definitely agree with that. And I think especially as kind of post pandemic, and as we made the shift to more and more people working from home and all those things, whatever last semblance of a perimeter might have existed before is gone. And so now identity is the front line. The endpoint, whether that's my mobile phone or my laptop or whatever, that is the front line. There is no perimeter. I am the perimeter.
That's right. I mean, there's 2 kinds of changes that have happened, right? One is on the user side, the perimeter is gone because now you're working from home. And the other, enterprises also are moving a lot of data and of the compute to a cloud. So now on the enterprise side, they have another vector, which is the cloud assets. So, we're adding a lot more complexity to identify these threats, which, makes it harder for us, but also it allows the attackers to decide, okay, now do I want to go with an endpoint? Do I want to compromise a credential? Do I want to go find assets in the cloud that may not be protected well? We're doing things for productivity, but we have to try to make sure that we do them in a secure fashion. Tough balance.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things, and this was I've heard the term pop up a couple times, but it's still relatively new to me, at least. But I wanted to talk with you about this concept of Swivel Chair Syndrome. It is like I say, somewhat unique term. So for people who don't know, can you kind of give a brief overview of what does it mean when we say Swivel Chair Syndrome?
Yeah, what it means is if you're sitting in a security operations center, the SOC in an enterprise, you don't have just one place where you can get all the information you need to respond to a threat. We all know attackers are moving faster. Some of the data that came out just from the CrowdStrike annual threat report, we say that attackers, the fastest compromise we saw was 2 minutes. and was less than that to move from one compromised asset to the next. So attackers are moving faster. Now, the tools we have are like a SIEM. And when you detect a threat with the SIEM, first you have to index the data, you have to figure out what the threat is, you investigate it, then you move, and you decide, okay, it's an endpoint threat. Then you move to the endpoint product that you use, and you figure, okay, what happened there. And then you have the identity platform. So you have all these different platforms that you need to go and investigate a threat. And finally, when you figure it out, you have a SOAR, a security orchestration platform that you use to respond to the threat. So if you're a security analyst, you're trying to not only just figure out what the problem is, and you're also trying to figure out, okay, which platform do I use? And depending on which platform you use, how and what kind of response I want to do. That essentially is a swivel chair. You now have all these UIs and all these different interfaces you need to know well to detect and respond to a threat. And that is the swivel chair syndrome in a nutshell.
Okay. As both the attack surface and the threat landscape evolve, does it seem like that problem is growing? Which is sort of a rhetorical question, because I know that as the attack surface and the threat landscape evolve, what ends up happening is someone will introduce a completely new tool and say, okay, well, now we need a different tool that fixes this problem. So, now I'm adding another console I've got to look at.
Yes, and it's not getting better, right? Think about it. We talked about cloud. You got identity, you got endpoint, you have data protection solutions, you have SASE, you have networking. We add all of these different platforms that we need a security operations person to know, not just know, but will be an expert, because you have to move fast. So it's not getting easier for them. What I think will happen is we'll start to figure out ways to reduce that. But you're never going to fully eliminate it, but you're going to find really clever ways to make that less of an issue. And I think that's really what the direction is at this point.
Okay. Well, one of the other things that is a huge issue, and I actually just wrote about it recently, and it definitely struck a nerve, because the page views or whatever of this particular article were significantly higher than most of the articles that I write, and that comes back to the idea of burnout within the cybersecurity industry. So the context switching that is required for swivel chair syndrome, and trying to maintain all of these different consoles and the stress of making sure you don't miss something and nothing slips through the cracks. I guess, what are your thoughts on how does that contribute to burnout and turnover within a SOC?
Yeah, so when you do context switching, when you do console switching, to pick your phrase, right? When you're doing a lot of that, you're just spending your time doing repetitive tasks. And repetitive tasks are never interesting. They're interesting for the first, second, third time. But if you're doing it every day in and day out, you're definitely not you're not solving the hard problem. You're becoming, you can use a phrase, right? You're becoming like a data wrangler. You're becoming like a console understanding person. You're not really solving a security problem. And I think that's the challenge. It's not that people don't want to keep solving security challenges and they get burned out. It's that they're doing these things that are so low value and so difficult and not giving any, it's not rewarding. And so what our job is now is to figure out, how do you make it so that the analysts, he's not dealing with data problems, the data paradox we talk about, more and more data is coming in, the complexity is going up, there's nonlinear costs, you're making security decisions based on financial information, all of that is not really rewarding for an analyst, and that's led to burnout. So if we want to try and avoid that, we have to start getting better at doing all the repetitive tasks in a manner that they don't focus on. Almost like, you think about abstracting the work of the tier 1 analyst. You try to make it so that they all become the tier 2, tier 3. They become the expert. They feel like, hey, the platform is helping me become better. The platform is making me smarter. So as the challenges change, your role changes, your job changes, your interest level remains. If you don't do that, you'll get the burnout.
Okay. Well, and that's a good, I think a pretty good segue. So one of the things that CrowdStrike has been focused on, and I've talked with a number of people at CrowdStrike about this over the last year and a half, is AI. You've got Charlotte. I can't say that's unique to CrowdStrike. I mean, everyone's got everyone is focused on AI, but one of the standout features of CrowdStrike is the AI and the ability to streamline and enhance that analyst experience. So I guess kind of walk me through what is CrowdStrike doing specifically that is going to and whether or not it uses is built on the AI part, but to automate and streamline the things you were just talking about, the kind of the routine tasks and the whatever, so that so that the analysts can focus on things that are more creative, more engaging, or whatever, and hopefully do a better job of protecting the environment overall.
Yeah, no, so that's a good question, right? So let's talk about the stuff that, like you said, everybody's doing, but there's gonna be degrees to how well you can do it. The simplest one that'll help reduce burnout, going back to that question, is if you are doing an investigation, and it's a complex investigation, you have many analysts working on it. Different people are doing different activities, updating what they need to do, finding new information. You go through that entire process and you finally find a solution. You use your SOAR and you respond to it. Then the problem starts, right? Who's going to write the report? How are you going to write the report? How do you make sure that you got the timeline right? How do you make sure you got the data right? If you had a good AI system that could just do that for you, that will make it possible not only to write an accurate report, but also to help your understanding, your organization's understanding that the next time this happens, we know what to do. We're getting better and smarter at it. That's one of the simplest things you will do. But there's tons of different things that you can do and get from analytics, from AI, that'll enhance what we call the next generation SIEM needs to do. For example, you need to be able to take all of this disparate data. You need to be able to normalize it. You need to be able to analyze it, and at least give the first glimpse to the analyst that, okay, here's all the different assets that might be related to your incident. You start there. That's one simple thing. The other, and something that we already do, is when you're working on an incident and you say, okay, this is what my blast radius looks like. These are these assets that are involved in an incident. Then, if you have a really good system, the AI system should be able to tell you, here's all these other assets in your enterprise that seem to be related to this incident. Stuff that is not obvious that starts to get bubbled up. But it can also tell you, hey, there's other places in the organization we're seeing a similar pattern. So now you're starting to see, okay, I've identified some places where the threat is, but maybe it's more widespread. Maybe the blast radius is different that we need to go and look at. So that's another way you can do it. There's also things we're doing, not, even as you talk about the analyst experience, but also the security architects. They also work with things that are somewhat mundane. You have a new data source. You have to parse it. You have to bring it in. You have to normalize it. You have to build the dashboards. You build the correlation rules. So one of the things we introduced, we announced a couple of months ago, is a AI-native AI parser. So you give a whole bunch of log samples, it parses the data source. That completely changes, your reluctance to bring in another data source, because there's a lot of the work that you're doing is just nothing. There's nothing creative about it, but you have to do it. So you start to do that. I'll give you another example that I think is more interesting and starts to really deliver on the vision, is how can you start to get predictive about it? So non-obvious attack paths is one great example. And you can start to say, okay, we've been hit by these kinds of threats, so maybe this is where we should be doing more focus. Again, it's not going to be that obvious to you. It's probably going to be sitting in 6 people's head. They have to all come together to understand it. So if the AI system can start to tell you, okay, here's something that you need to start looking at as part of your predictive security, that is now something that you have that you didn't have before. But it's even more valuable when you start to say, okay, Microsoft comes out with the next set of vulnerabilities that they identified. As an organization, you have to respond really, really quickly. But if you have some predictive capabilities built in, you will also understand which ones impact your business more than others. So you can start to, get yourself protected against it. Because what's going to happen is, just like we have tools, attackers have tools. They're going to start to get very quick at building these things. So there's a lot of closed loop things that you get that you won't normally get if you just did these things in the way we've been doing it until now. So the AI vision, we talk a lot about AI, but it's starting to deliver on some really powerful capabilities.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So a couple of the things you hit on, like on the one hand, one of the things I've noted a few times is that as much as AI has been like hyper focus for the last year and a half since the advent of ChatGPT or whatever, it's not like it was new to cybersecurity. I mean, everything in cybersecurity was already built on AI ML for the
Right.
decade prior.
Right.
And so we were already talking about AI ML were already buzzwords, before ChatGPT. And when I go back, I say a lot of the things we now say about AI, and that I think, and that I will say up front, I agree AI does a much better job of this, are similar to the things we thought we were going to accomplish with SIEM and then SOAR. Like the whole, it was a similar challenge being addressed to say, hey, there's this overwhelming amount of information. What if I could pull this all into one console and make it easier for you? But then that became, okay, well, now I have an overwhelming number of alerts that are just in one console. What am I supposed to do with that? And then we had SOAR, but I feel like SOAR was theoretically going to execute on this the information from the SIEM, but it wasn't quite there. A lot of organizations didn't really trust it. You had to build your own playbooks, all of these things, and so like that never really. I feel like that never really realized its potential either. And then that's where I feel like now we've got generative AI and we've improved things to where, okay, well now we can kind of pull these things together into one place and do some effective analysis and take action on them in that way. And then the other thing you noted about kind of the ability to connect the dots, because even if you're the best SOC analyst and you can look at all that stuff and you can connect the dots, humans are just more limited and the ability, like I can't see the entire environment all at once, and I can't and I also look at it as I also don't have the memory for history. Like I'll remember like the attack that happened last week, or I'll remember whatever's like the trending attacks, but I'm not going to necessarily have top of mind something that happened 2 years ago or whatever. And so that's where I think, like, in terms of scale, the AI is much better at being able to see the entire scope of time and the entire scope of the environment and connect the dots.
I think that's exactly right. We all are. There's a lot of smart people. The problem is you're not working 24/7. The problem is you're not able to, what happened to your point about 2 years ago, you don't know now. There's also another thing that we've started to do more of, which is going to help us and become better at responding to threats. And that's the fact that a lot of the data is now starting to show up in one place. Remember, when we first looked at the SIEM, you were at the endpoint, you had endpoint data, and then you moved it all into the SIEM, and you made some decisions because the data challenges. You would make decisions on, what do I send? Do I send all the raw data? Do I send telemetry? Do I only send alerts? So we got pretty bad at being able to get all the data in one place. Now, once you did that, you had a SOAR that was on a different platform. So the fact that we put all of this together is also making it possible for us to use AI in a more leverageable way. So it's not looking at disparate platforms. It's looking at the data in the same way. It's looking at the data in one platform. All of those things, I think, are going to help us as we start to respond to security threats, and we expect our AI to respond to security threats. Right? That's that. I think. Not just the AI, it's also the fundamental architectures that we're using are going to help us as we start to see, how do you make the SOC smarter? How do you make people in the SOC smarter?
Okay. Again, you're great at setting me up for the segues. So great segue, because I wanted to, so every conversation I have had with any vendor around generative AI and the fear or the potential of, is this going to take my job? Everyone has said, well, no, it's not, AI is not going to replace you. It's going to augment you. You need the human involved. And I agree with that for the most part. I mean, I think there are jobs that can just be replaced, but when it comes to the SOC and we say, okay, great, I've got generative AI, it can do all of these routine tasks. It can handle all of the mundane work for me. With that as the foundation, then if I'm a SOC analyst, what do I do to upskill myself as a security professional? Like what should I be doing? What should I focus on? What should I be doing differently now that I've got the AI doing this kind of base level stuff?
Yeah, so that now you're starting to get more smarter about the business process itself, understanding how this impacts my business. AI can tell you what the impact will be, but you got to understand what that impact will be to your business, what the impact will be to the people who work in the organization. Does it matter to you that somebody got into the manufacturing system? In some companies, absolutely. In some other companies, may not matter at all, right? You don't. AI still doesn't have the context of the business process itself. And so what we're saying is, yeah, your tier one work, a lot of it will go to the AI, will become very much automated. But when you start to say, okay, how do I respond? Should we respond in a certain manner? You could say, I'll write a workbook, a playbook that does this when this threat is detected. But it also depends on the context. For example, you may decide that in some cases, if you have an identity compromise, you may say we're going to force an MFA on that user that's been compromised. Sometimes you may say, I want to block it. Now, until you get that figured out for your business, you don't want to automate it fully, because then the system will do what the system does, which is it'll pick the one that it thinks is right, but may not be right for your business. So I think that the analysts and the people who are now sitting in the SOC are going to be focused more on how it impacts their business and the business processes, a lot less than just saying, okay, now how do I go find this data, or how do I figure out what's related to what in an incident? So you're going to be doing a lot more interesting things rather than focusing on just identifying what the threat is and how do I respond to a threat without context and without knowledge of the business process.
Okay. Well, and I would say that aligns as well with what I feel is the general evolution of cybersecurity, where it's like, if you go back 20 years, cybersecurity was much more, I don't know, we had a more draconian approach. It was like, we are security and we're going to implement these rules because that's how you be secure. And that created a lot of friction, a lot of conflict with people, like on the sales or production side, who are like, well, we're trying to get things done, and you're getting in the way. And so over the course of the last 20 years, there definitely has been an evolution from both sides, where the security professionals understand that our role is to facilitate business securely, not to do security for the sake of security. And the business people also understand that, just getting things done for the sake of getting things done isn't enough. You have to also do that securely. So it's like, as the threat landscape has evolved and as there's more awareness of cybersecurity, I feel like the business is more aware of cybersecurity, and cybersecurity is more aware of the business. And so I think what you just described is another step in that evolution of being able to take it to a lower level and say that even at the SOC analyst level, your job isn't just to do security for the sake of security. Your job is to understand how that security impacts the business.
Absolutely. Yeah, to your point, before security was just like an answer was either yes or a no. Now it's no longer yes or no, because now it was so tied into the business process. Even with the identity product that we introduced with Preempt, we used to always say that there's a gray scale of responses. You have an allow or a deny, but then there's things like notify, reset password, multi-factor authentication, notify someone else. You need a whole gray scale of responses, because that is how you can also ensure accelerated adoption. Because it was either plus or minus, right? Then you'd be very careful about taking action. But now, when you have the ability with a rich set of responses that we've introduced with multi-factor authentication and all the other ways that we can get security, you can respond to a threat. Not only have we, not only has it helped security experts, but I also would argue that it's also made users more knowledgeable about what a security impact would be. Because if I do something different and I get a multi-factor authentication, I know, hey, this is different for me. So now somebody's making sure that I am who I say I am. So it's actually had both ways. security practitioners have gotten better at understanding business process, but users are also becoming part of the security fabric. And that's actually a good thing for all of us.
I would agree. I mean, I agree with that. I think, there's also always been there's the mantra of, the user is the weakest link, and all those things. And I have always kind of said, well, listen, even if we can agree that that's true, even if we can say, yes, it's the user who's going to click on the link in the phishing email, inadvertently, it's the user who's going to open a file attachment inadvertently. Like, yes, the user is the weakest link, but as security professionals, that's not an excuse. Like okay, we know up front that the user is the weakest link, so you have to still protect the environment. Even with that, you can't blame the user.
Yeah, it's a cop out, right? I mean, what does that buy you by saying the user is the weakest link? You have to find ways to allow them to help you do your job better. So yeah, we are doing better though. Lots of organizations have made it possible for us to make the user just as understanding of the challenges, especially with identity threats. They really are our first line of defense, because if they didn't do it, we'd have compromises all the time.
Well, and I'm not as familiar right now. I assume this still goes on, but I know that once upon a time, the strategy we were using was to make it real for the user in terms of their personal life. It's all right, you might not care if the company gets compromised. Maybe that doesn't factor in for you, but you do care if your own personal stuff gets compromised. You do care if, so educating users on that level, and just helping users understand good cybersecurity practices and cybersecurity hygiene for themselves personally ends up yielding benefits for the company.
Absolutely. Couldn't be more true, right? Because if everybody's going to, again, if you go back to the weakest link analogy, if those are no longer weakest links, they're getting better and better. Your business is getting better, is getting more secure. Yeah, we can't just end up thinking that everything will be solved with tools. I think the tools, it goes back to the point you asked, right? What happens to the analyst? It's a data problem. It's having the right tools, having the right data, having the right people, the right process, the automation. All of that has to come together to build an effective security program.
Okay. All right. So I guess my final question is sort of a little bit more forward-looking, kind of, which is just to say, what are your thoughts on the future of where CrowdStrike's role in reducing SOC fatigue, fostering a more sustainable work environment for security analysts, and just kind of how does cybersecurity evolve from here from a CrowdStrike lens?
Yeah, so we talk about the AI-native SOC. What we're saying is, you have to build a SOC that is almost looking at everything from an AI perspective to help the analyst. So your next generation SIEM becomes the operating system of that AI-native SOC. So that's our goal. Our goal is to build that next generation SIEM that integrates all of these concepts we talked about for the last half hour in a manner that you can build the AI-native SOC. And you build that right, then you can make the SOC the place where you don't have burnout, you have effective security, and you protect the business. I mean, that's ultimately what we're trying to do, right? We stop breaches. Our mantra is stop breaches. And so that's our vision. That's what we're focused on. It's where I spend all my time. And I think it's just as exciting as it was when I got into security almost 24 years ago. So feels like it's a new day again.
Yeah, well, and I've had that conversation over time, because it seems like very often you find someone who said, basically every year when the numbers come out and you say, okay, well, cybersecurity spending went up 25%, but the losses from data breaches and ransomware went up 30%. Yeah. And and everyone's like, okay, well, how come I keep spending more money, but we're still having more problems? Obviously that everything's broken, and it's like, well, no, everything keeps changing. So it's like, it's not that it's broken, like the things that we fixed are fixed, but, for the most part. But, some things might be broken, but in general, it's like, it's not a static environment. So the attack surface shifts, the threat landscape expands. And so you do have to keep spending money. You do have to keep buying new tools, and there will be new threats because the attackers are also out there trying to innovate. And so that's all part of the game.
Yeah, no, and that's what makes it interesting for me, and I'm sure it makes it interesting for you, right? The attackers are evolving. We're also evolving. We're hoping that we're one step ahead of them, if not two. But we can't just say, okay, I've got a great solution and it'll work for you forever. It won't. We have to keep changing.
All right. Well, thank you very much for taking the time. It was a good conversation.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you. For me, it's just, it's nice to talk to somebody who's as interested in this and as I am.
Awesome. I appreciate you investing your time to listen to the podcast, but I also invite you to engage on social media. Please go like our Facebook page and follow @TechSpective on Twitter and Instagram. You can feel free to let me know what you like, let me know what you don't like, let me know if you love it, let me know if it sucks, and let me know what products you'd like to see reviewed or what questions you'd like to see answered in future posts.